Welcome to another program sponsored by Manatee2020 and METV. To date, we have been looking at best educational practices and ways we can promote student learning. This program, however, is a departure from our educational focus. As most people know, the Manatee School District is in transition, experiencing some financial challenges as well as management and leadership disruption. Our superintendent resigned abruptly in September, revealing a multi-million-dollar budget hole. We are addressing both the management and financial issues aggressively and systematically, and with a lot of help. Let me tell you what we are doing. First, we engaged the services of an experienced educational leader, Dr. David Gaylor, as interim superintendent. Next, we launched a national search for a new superintendent with the assistance of both the Florida School Board Association and the community, whose ongoing input we have sought and want. Third, in order to figure out what went wrong on the financial and reporting side, the board charged the audit committee with the task of providing detailed answers and solutions so that the September surprise of significant magnitude will not happen again. The audit committee, which is comprised of 2 board members and community and financial experts, is overseeing a special audit, which is called a forensic audit. While this audit is going on, I thought it would be helpful to get some basic facts about audits, a sort of everything you wanted to know about audits but were afraid to ask. I thank our 2 guest experts who are not involved with our audit, Byron Shin and Steve Osher from Tampa, who will discuss their experiences and help to inform us. Our 2 community members are Rosalie Schaefer, president of the League of Women Voters, and Richard Jackson, a columnist. They are here to ask questions. First, for most of us, the word audit conjures up a dread specter. Some of us have gotten those letters from the IRS telling us to bring out our shoeboxes of records and explain and explain and explain. However, unlike the IRS audit process, audits for businesses, governmental units, and nonprofit organizations are regular and routine, and a normal requirement in order to improve management practices and to comply with government regulations and transparency. I welcome all of you here, and we're going to start with Byron. Please tell us what you do. I know you've been here in the community for a long time and are a native, and give us an overview, if you would, of your work.
Okay, I've been a CPA in Florida since 1981. I started with one of the international accounting firms and then moved back to Manatee County in 1983 after graduating from the University of South Florida in Tampa in 1979. Since that time, I've practiced in the tax area and done some auditing, some governmental, some nonprofit, some for-profit, and our firm continues to practice in those areas. On occasion, we've gotten involved in investigations of fraud, both inside clients, existing clients that have a mishap happen internally, and then we investigate. And we also have been involved in investigations just from a new client relationship, from an attorney that would say, we need someone to come in and look into why there's either the business is going under or they're having a partner fight. And so there's various reasons why we get involved in a forensic sort of way, which is quite different than a financial statement audit or an IRS audit. And I also serve on the State Board of Accountancy Probable Cause Panel, which oversights the CPA practitioners in the state when they have issues with how they're practicing.
So the 2 reasons you just cited, a partnership disagreement
Sure.
and a business having difficulties, would you call those the red flags that might indicate a special audit is needed?
It's an investigation. A forensic audit it has a different scope,
okay.
and it has different results that the user is after.
Okay, let's talk to Steve then, the forensic audit specialist from Tampa. Tell us the kind of forensic audits you've been involved with and what the outcomes are, please.
Well, there you have a broad range, Karen, of work that is done. Byron indicated that there were several that, whether it's a partner dispute or some other kind of contractual dispute, we've really run the gamut from a lot of, my background actually started in the traditional financial audit arena because of the need, or at least the legal community's need to have some people testify in the courtroom, more work started occurring on my part with regards to the legal community and being, if you will, a financial expert on their behalf. That led to any number of investigations. Some of them are financial fraud type related investigations. Some of them where there may be disputes with regards to economic issues and a need to investigate further have been part of the work we've done as well.
So are lawyers always involved with forensic audits?
The answer is probably yes. Yes, in the sense that almost the term forensic suggests investigative. The term forensic is something that you're anticipating and expecting that a court process may be involved at some point later on. So when you start talking the courtroom, then you're obviously talking the legal community. We have been engaged by the judicial system. The judges have asked us to serve as their examiner in certain situations. Lawyers have asked us, but we've also been asked in a number of, if you will, private matters where a party is concerned that they may not have gotten all the information. They may not be ready for litigation yet, and they want to, if you will, do their own inquiries. So clients have come through our door to say, we'd like you to investigate.
Do all forensic audits wind up in the courtroom?
No.
Okay.
The courtroom is the end result. Frequently when all the facts, or at least an indication that all the facts are put on the table and known, hopefully that may bring two parties that are in dispute with each other to the table for some kind of settlement, some kind of resolution. Oh, you know, if I had known that, I might not have done this. So the courtroom is not always the ultimate place for a resolution.
So there might be a mediation or a settlement that, you know, arises out of getting at the facts. Before I allow our guest panelists, our guest questioners to ask some questions, I'd like to find out what have been the barriers that you've experienced in getting at those facts.
Many times you asked about the attorneys. Many times it's an issue of definition. And as accountants, it might not be clear in an operating agreement or misunderstanding between partners how something needs to be treated. And there is a contract out there. And sometimes they're not laid out as clearly as you would like, but that's what they have to live within. So we look to attorneys for leadership on those definitions. We also are involved in when depositions occur, because when somebody makes a verbal comment, then we say, prove it. And we're looking for factual evidence that can then be used to determine the position people have taken, or the facts or lack thereof of what they should have done. And then that information is then shared with the attorneys. And then in depositions, trying to prove or disprove certain people's knowledge or lack thereof.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, you're looking for a follow? Okay. In litigation, there's a process that's known as discovery. And Karen, I think your question was, what barriers have we seen? And invariably, it's the parties themselves that become the barriers. I think ultimately, we as the investigating team would like to get all the answers, and we use discovery and the attorney's use of discovery to help get us information. But if you have two parties that are in dispute with each other, there's a reluctance sometimes to share all the information. And so if they want an open opportunity, we have to go to other ways to get our information, which is what the attorneys refer to as third-party subpoenas, to get information from sources that may not have, or they don't have any stake in this matter, and so they produce the information that they have in their records. But that's typically, those are the biggest barriers that we tend to see.
Barriers.
There have been, I came in with 8 questions. You'll be delighted to know that 2 of them have been answered already. Are there penalties for not cooperating? In other words, do you have the force of law in a forensic audit?
The attorneys have the force of law in a forensic. Karen asked a question at the very beginning, and that was, do you always have attorneys involved? Mm-hmm. And the answer is, the forensic accountant does not have the power to subpoena. Occasionally, where the court may appoint me into a position as a receiver or an examiner, they will allow me the power of subpoenaing certain records. But this is something that the attorneys have been responsible for. So Byron or I, if we're involved in an investigation and we want to look at something, we will say, please make a request for this type of information. And that is done in every engagement that we do. So, but it's done through the attorneys, not through ourselves directly.
Okay, I'm getting a better handle on a forensic audit because, you know, all the television shows now, the word forensics comes up just about every show that you're watching, and I'm getting a better idea now because I think there may have been some misconceptions. I certainly had some.
And like, for instance, when they ask for information, a lot of times the attorneys will do it in a legal format. But because they're not forensic auditors themselves, we're actually writing the questions for them, and they're cutting and pasting in their legal documents.
Okay, because for
and
some of
those questions might come back with a follow-up question. Once we get that information, it'll end up with a second, a third request. Not unusual.
Okay, because it wouldn't be unusual for a number of people at the school board to not ever have been involved in a legal proceeding of any kind, other than perhaps getting married or doing something, but not where there's an adversarial relationship or an investigative relationship. And so there may be a fair level of discomfort involved. Do you find that?
Discomfort on the people who need the forensic auditor, is that what you're asking?
Discomfort on the people being asked the questions.
Sure. I think nobody likes being put under the spotlight, save for this, of course. Nobody likes to be put under the spotlight in terms of a question and answer. And when typically you get into a forensic type of analysis or investigation, you're asking questions that the people to whom you're asking the questions are often saying, why am I involved? Now, some of them may be parties. They may be reluctant to reveal everything. I mean, there's a tendency to hold back, but it's the responsibility on our part to try to get an understanding of what happened. But I think Byron made a point about the underlying records, and that is the fact that, Richard, you may say something to me. I go, okay, well, that's nice. Show me. I want to see support for the statements that you made or the information that you're providing.
I'd like to ask them, how detailed should an audit of this type be? Should they go back several years? Should they expand it to all the different budget items? People may wonder, well, if a mistake happened this year, maybe there have been mistakes, in past years.
Well, when you're doing a forensic audit, you define the scope of the engagement on the front end. The person asking and hiring us, either directly or through an attorney, and if there's not an attorney initially, there usually is soon thereafter, trying to understand what they want us to dig into, because it's quite detailed. It's quite elaborate. You're preparing, in a worst case scenario, to have to go into the courtroom in front of a judge and defend your particular circumstances that you have uncovered. So you're doing it, there isn't, in a financial statement audit, you want to make sure it's materially correct and there are no material misstatements. Mm-hmm. And then it's complete. In a forensic audit, they want to know specifics. And you ask about if you see a breach in controls. The question would be, in the scope you would set out, a what if you find this, then you go back and say, we have a control breach here, how much more do you want to go? So sometimes these have phases, and the initial phase of your initial forensic could come back with your initial findings, and then they say, we want to dig some more because of this or because of that. So it has several chapters to it in many cases.
Could you
I have
define the terms breaching controls and material? Not everybody speaks accounting.
Okay. We have standards that the CPA profession has and the rules that are upon us. And for financial statement audits, materiality is usually defined as a percentage of income or a percentage of equity. To what degree could a misstatement happen and in its individual or totality not go over a certain level? For instance, if you have an organization that has $1 million in revenue and somebody stole $1,000, they might say that isn't a material misstatement. However, if that $1,000 happens in your Little League baseball club account, that's significant and material. Whereas in a forensic audit, they want to know about the $1,000 regardless of the size of the revenue. So that's it in a simple format. And Steve could add to that too.
Rosalie, to your question, in terms of scope and time, frequently what will happen is there will be an identification of an issue where something has come to the attention of someone, whomever that may be, and they say, we'd like to have a further look at that. When the investigation starts or it's at some point, an issue may come up that says, you know, we see it for this time period, but we're concerned that it may have taken place over a longer time period. And depending on the circumstances, and we've been involved in a few of the fairly large Ponzi schemes that have taken place in the area. And so we knew that there were people who were affected in a 2 or 3 year period, but because there were some questions and concerns as to were there people who had been affected during a longer period because of the fraud, we could go back and take a look, and we were asked to do so. So as you get into the engagement, the people who are directing the engagement, so Byron was absolutely correct, whoever is making a determination that a forensic audit needs to be happening is usually the one dictating exactly what you're going to look at and when.
To kind of quarterback us.
But it can expand depending on what is discovered.
It usually does, in my experience. It usually, unless you find out just right out of the gate that everything's fine and it was all just supposition and innuendos. But most of the time, people don't go into the cost of hiring us unless they have enough evidence or feel like they see enough issues that warrant the deep dive, if you will. And then when we start to uncover information, we stand back and kind of caucus with our client and say, this is what we're finding. Now what level do you want us to go and how much further? And do you want to expand the scope, or do you stay on that one issue and continue to finish that area and then take it? So,
Will the findings in a forensic audit, will they differentiate between sloppy accounting and fraud?
Oh, Byron, I'm sure you want me to take this one.
go ahead. I'll follow up.
Yeah, all right. The findings will show what happened. The determination as to whether this was sloppy or whether this was fraud is a matter of the underlying information that you're looking at.
But who makes that determination?
Well, fraud, in the courtroom, fraud is determined by the trier of fact, as they say, which would be ultimately the judge, or if there's a jury, it would be the jury. And as was pointed out to me many years ago, the determination of intent, because fraud is an intentional misstatement of a material issue. So what you then have is a determination of intent, and I'm not qualified, nor am I in a position to tell you what the intent was. I can tell you that a behavior that is done on multiple occasions is something that would seem to show that there was fraudulent conduct, but ultimately that determination of intent becomes the court to decide. Whether it's sloppy, whether it's something that you go, gee, you really should have known better. This should not have occurred this way. You had the training, you had the understanding, the expertise. If it's a single event, you go, okay. But if all of a sudden you see a pattern, or there's, and I'll give you an example. I think if Byron wants to finish, or I can give you the example of, we were involved in a case a couple years ago that it had to do with a furniture company, and there were some questions about certain transactions that had taken place. During the investigation, we had looked at some credit card statements, and we found that just before Christmas, a string of pearls had been purchased. And from my perspective, I didn't know any of the furniture that they were manufacturing that had the pearls placed into the furniture, so it became something we wanted to look at further. When we investigated the payment that was made for those pearls, we found that it was actually 3 payments, all of an amount under $5,000, so that the auditors would never uncover it because their threshold level was at a certain amount. We then saw that the way the allocation of the expenses were made it wasn't for pearls, it was for cost of goods. It was for repairs and maintenance, none of which described the fact that it was pearls being purchased or a gift being purchased. And so we took that to the attorneys and we just said, you know, this is not what it should be. This wasn't sloppy. There was an intent in this case to mislead. And so we use that as the evidence.
When you get the result of a forensic audit, is it automatically turned over then to the authorities? Do you submit this to somebody that can review it?
Again, the answer is very simply, the auditor, the forensic auditor, examiner is engaged by someone. And that someone is who the report would be. If it's the law firm or an attorney, then that's who we would report to. If it's the judge, that's who we report to. If it's the internal audit committee, that's who the report would go to. And so it's the engagement that dictates who the report is.
And those are public documents then? They are not public documents?
No, sir. Again, it depends on the litigation or the circumstances surrounding it. Mm-hmm. You know, if it's for a public entity, then I imagine that everything will be in the sunshine and available for disclosure.
During the investigative phase, do the people involved have a right to remain silent if they fear that some charge may be coming out of it?
Thank you. You've just asked me a legal question, and I will not answer your legal question. So. No, the rights of the parties really is a legal question, Rosalie. And if someone is obviously concerned, then they need to be represented appropriately. Frequently, Byron or I, when we're doing an investigation, will ask to speak to certain people. We will be given permission. Sometimes, going back to one of Richard's earlier questions, the court may give me the authority to conduct a deposition. It's usually the right of an attorney to do so, but not unlike issuing a subpoena. When the court has given me that right, we may and have requested depositions be taken of certain parties. So again, whoever's giving the authority is usually what controls what may or may not happen during the course of the investigation.
And as a follow-up, we'll get into the discovery where certain information comes to us. And then from that, will go a question for a deposition, either of the source of the documents or to other parties. And many times we'll sit beside the attorney who's doing the questioning, and from those responses we'll have follow-up questions that we write and hand to the attorney, and then they ask.
Okay. Okay.
Is it forensic audit, is it comprehensive? In other words, with fund accounting, which is problematic in and of itself, is the scope limited to certain funds, or will it cover all of the funds?
It depends on the scope of the engagement. You know, you might have someone that says, I just want to look at the operating fund, or it might be because of debt covenants with a certain circumstance for the financial institution where it might be considered bank fraud, so you're only looking at certain areas. So it depends on the circumstances whether or not it goes that broad.
Okay. Karen, you don't happen to know offhand whether all of these funds will be covered?
Well, I really can't discuss this, what's going on with the Manatee School District, because that is underway. What I would suggest is, because we are a public entity and a subject to the sunshine, we have a special audit section on our website. The contract is there along with all the updates, et cetera. So people can go to that site and see where we are. And I'm not at liberty to, because we're in an interim situation, we're still going through interviews, we're not there yet. I think we have to wait on that one.
Richard, maybe I can help. And I know you just targeted on a specific question, but when the engagement for a forensic audit takes place, unlike a financial audit, which will cover the entire scope of all the financial information, this is much more of a targeted type of investigation where there is an identification of a specific area that someone wants us to look at. Now, if during the investigation we see, gee, we've looked at this one area, maybe we should be looking at a second or third area, we will invariably raise that with whoever has engaged us. But the engagement itself is usually specifically targeted to one area.
Okay. Okay.
Is there any idea of how much something like this could cost? It sounds like it could go in a lot of different directions and build and spread.
That's exactly why it goes through phases, so that people don't. It's expensive. You're not dealing with brand new accountants out of school. They're highly trained. They usually have a deep audit background. They are also trained to handle the legal documentation and keeping very articulate records for the attorneys to use as exhibits if and when they're used in the courtroom. So usually an initial startup could be 100 hours, 50 hours, and then it could last 3-4 years in some instances when you're involved in oversighting two partners in a partner fight, and you're having to run the business until they can come to terms. But usually in a financial fraud investigation, it usually doesn't take, you can get through it in 4 to 6 months, sometimes shorter. We were recently involved in one forensic study, and it was summarized and closed in about 6 weeks. They really wanted to get to the bottom of it, and again, you can prove intent pretty quickly when you find 2 sets of books. It's real easy. It's prima facie of intent when you see them preparing 2 sets of records and they're breaking down controls. So some things you can come to pretty quickly. Some take, and also how easy the information comes to you, or if they're going to make it difficult. And when you start asking people when they're deposed and raise their right hand, and then if they want to plead the fifth and play the legal fight, it can exasperate the process.
I'd like to talk a little bit about plain old sloppiness versus intent. It sounds like the pearls were a cover-up for maybe a girlfriend or a special Christmas purchase, because it wasn't at the time, around the time that you found that on the credit cards. What are the motives? Why do people, quote unquote, misbehave or get sloppy, and this whole intent business? Can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure, we can talk about it. Early on, I guess a wise old attorney said, there is nothing criminal with being stupid. and that was fairly profound because, you know, as you look at some of the things that we do and you see some decisions that are being made, you know, whether you always have the right person helping to either record documents or record financial transactions. You know, our work is to go in there and to try to see what has been recorded, what has been shown in the records, and does that make sense? Is that what we expected to see? And frequently we see things that are not right, but I would like to think that for the most part, people tried to do the right thing, but maybe it was sloppy, or maybe they weren't fully informed, maybe they weren't fully trained to do the kind of work that they've been asked to do. And yet, Byron's correct. When we start to see a pattern, or with the pearls, it became pretty clear that this was meant to deceive anybody who wanted to look at it, or in this case, actually put it below a threshold level that they knew wouldn't be open, and that's why they split the payments and they split the categories of expense. So you can never really tell what you're going to turn up. Now, to a comment, going back for a second on Rosalie, sometimes, and Byron is exactly correct when he talks about phases, because you don't want to jump in with both feet. You want to sort of put the toe in the water and then maybe the rest of the foot before you start deciding how far you want to go in your investigation. And again, as an example, a couple years ago, one of the judges asked us to get involved in a matter that there was between the parties an allegation of about $5 million of misdealings. Well, it didn't take us very long once we got the records, which again is a comment that Byron made. When we saw that there was no fraud, what had happened was some of the transactions and how they were recorded were not picked up the way they should have been. And it wasn't intent to deceive, it was just they'd been put into the wrong account, it had been completely missed, and there was no $5 million that was missing. So we started and shut down that investigation pretty quickly. So it didn't take very much time.
Mm-hmm. It's part of the investigation whether or not people knew of a problem but didn't disclose it when and where they should have.
That would be a sign of intent. Perceived.
You know, this has been a very interesting time period. The economy has been in its doldrums for a few years now, and people are trying to hold on to their jobs. And I don't want to go too far afield of your question, but Byron and I have both had the opportunity to sit on the State Board of Accountancy, and we've had the opportunity to oversee a lot of complaints and issues with CPAs. And something that occurs, and it's not just a CPA problem, I'm just trying to give you an example here, Rosalie, but we've seen situations where in order to hold on to their position, they've ignored certain things that they may have seen within a company or a business operation. And it isn't so much because they want to be bad, or they're bad people themselves, but if they disclose something, then their job may be terminated. If they say something, and while it's pretty nice to sit here and say ethically they need to do the right thing and everybody, well, some people may have a family to feed, they may have other issues, and that's certainly not condoning bad behavior, but that at least might be an explanation for why some people know something but choose not to report it and perhaps what we would say do the right thing.
You would hope you'd have a healthy organization, that it would be for the betterment of the organization. However, in these economic times, there are some employers that will actually pay their accounting people more than probably the marketplace. And then they become beholden to them because if they go to leave, they're going to take a pay cut. Unfortunately, that's a reality, and sometimes you see that. And then you'll see maybe the owners push them to do things. For instance, with an IRS situation. So if I'm doing a tax return and I'm looking at the information and I'm saying, wow, there's aggressive position, am I willing to sign the tax return with that position? Probably not. We're going to have a talk with the owners. But when somebody wants to say something to their boss and call them out, it takes some guts. It really does. And in these economic times, it's very difficult. Another situation is, and we run across it with our ongoing everyday tax work, you'll have a controller who won't stay current on the internal financials because they know if they give them to the owners, they will be the next person to be cut. And combine that job with another person that maybe isn't a CPA or isn't, we'll move it to the full charge bookkeeper. So they're saying, wow, you know, so they'll say, well, maybe if I give them 2 more months, we get into season and the income comes up and then they'll catch up the financial statements. So sometimes that'll happen. We've seen that. And then the owners come to me at the end of the year and they say, Byron, how could I, you know, what happened here? And so then I go ask, well, when's your last financial statements? When did they come out? How often are you talking? Where's the problems? And most operators in today's environment, though, if you're still a successful business in today's environment, you've reinvented yourself. You've rethought your financial reporting systems, and you're really watching your cost with a really fine pencil. Whether it's a government organization or a for-profit business or a nonprofit, we've all had to really reevaluate everything in the business. And when you do that, it puts a lot of pressure when you go and you make drastic cuts. There will be some unintended consequences that create some dysfunctionality. And so in a normal relationship between an accountant and our clients, we're trying to give them advice as we're seeing some of those dysfunctionalities occur. And still try to maintain a control on the cost. So,
let's talk about consequences. You mentioned consequences. What kind of consequences have you seen in your practice? Steve?
Well, since I spend most of my time in and around a courtroom, people die. People go to prison, people are fined, or they lose a lot of money financially as a result of their bad behavior. The die component of it was not intended to do anything other than to say that we've been involved in some schemes to defraud individuals, and either a Ponzi scheme, which was uncovered, or someone who defrauded a bank and a lot of other people, and ultimately chose suicide as his way out of the pending litigation and the investigation that was taking place or took place after their respective deaths.
Enron's a perfect example of it.
I'm sorry?
Enron, one of the nation's largest financial collapses. There was a suicide in that.
Well, here in Sarasota County, we are in the Manatee-Sarasota area. A few years ago, we had an investigation that was conducted on behalf of a receiver who took over after a gentleman had committed suicide. It was a hedge fund, and we literally had to go back and recreate the entire hedge fund. But it was during that time period that the consequences, in this case, was trying to get money back. The receiver's intent was to get money back to the people who had been harmed by this gentleman and his behavior. Typically in a bankruptcy situation where we find ourselves involved, it is to try to maximize the return to the creditors, the people who were harmed by the debtor who may have behaved badly.
I'd like to add to that. When we give them the information, them being the attorneys / our client, they decide whether or not they're going to take civil action and then whether or not, then they're going to turn over the information to the state's attorney to then determine if there's criminal direction. So sometimes we see it where they say, because they're so, in my experience has been, you can take issues where you've got them dead to rights in a white-collar crime where there's theft or misuse of funds, which is another form of theft. You can go and borrow the company airplane and use it for personal purposes and not ask, and that's a misuse, as an example. At the end of the day, there's only so much manpower the state attorney has. And what I've found is that some of the smaller white-collar crime is not criminally prosecuted because their ability, once you try to get as much civil damages back, financial reparation back from the party who had defrauded the organization, usually the state attorney will not prosecute on a smaller one. But it's their decision to pick and choose when they want to criminally prosecute. But the civil piece is trying to get damages back. And then we, as the forensic accountants, are very involved in determining the financial damage that's upon the organization.
Have you ever known anyone to get back the cost of conducting the forensic audit?
Steve's chomping at the bit.
No, I don't know that I'm chomping at the bit necessarily. That, you know, hopefully there's a cost benefit to every analysis, and I think that the attorneys we work with and the people with whom we normally provide services to, that always has to be a consideration. If you're going to spend $1 million to investigate something that is going to have no opportunity to return anything to anybody, well, okay, maybe you don't need to do $1 million worth of work in order to prove up the fact that there's an issue that you need to, you know, address. But in the commercial type cases where we're involved, I think that's always a consideration. I'm going to spend so much money. Will I get back so much money? A lot of it, the attorneys, a lot of the people involved in the process, you know, you may have all the liability in the world, but if there's not any way to get damages, or there's not any way to recover any money because the person whom you're going after doesn't have any money to go after anymore because they spent it all.
They're judgment proof. And
they're judgment proof, that's a different issue. But Karen, I'd like to follow up on your consequence question from just a moment ago, and that is, sometimes what the investigation does show is who knew what, when did they know it, and now you've got a situation where you're saying, okay, what can I do to repair or improve the accounting system, if that's what it is, the communication systems, if that's what it is, like with these two partners who thought that one had taken well, he didn't understand what the $5 million and where it had gone to. So the consequence may actually be a better, more improved system on a going forward basis, and that always has to be, you know, sort of in the beginning, is that the best that I'm going to expect to maybe do a better job next year or the year after? Or am I really looking for something a little bit more in terms of some punitive measure, whatever that may be?
Which groups, private businesses or even a public corporation, governmental units or nonprofit, in your respective experiences, have had greater use of forensic audits? Have you seen any trends over the last 10 years?
Oh, you know, all the above.
Yeah, I'm going to say it probably somewhat tongue-in-cheek, and I probably mean it. It's all across the board.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Well, you know, there really is no ownership to behaving badly. I mean, you know, you can really see it in just about every organization. Now, one of the things that we continue to see, and I think I'm a member and a certified fraud examiner and a member of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. they have a report to the nation that discusses who are the perpetrators behind this fraudulent conduct or this bad behavior. And invariably, the finger goes straight to the top of an organization. And what is the tone that is set by the leaders in any organization? Are they the type that will allow mistakes or bad behavior to occur? Do they turn the other cheek? Do they have too much on their plate and therefore are ignoring what's going on around them? Are they hiring the best and the brightest to do whatever the job or task may be? That may be a cop-out. That may be an easy way to just point the finger up, but I think that's been pretty typical.
Accountability is starts at the top, really.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Richard, did you have another? You said you had 8 questions. I've only heard
Well,
about 6.
yeah, and we're down to the last couple that I have. I'd still like to get back to the parameters. We have a school board situation right now where they're looking for, forensic auditors, and they're going to set something up. Who sets the parameters for the audit that the school board is going to go through?
The client.
Your internal audit committee in this
The
case.
internal audit committee. In this case, it was the internal audit committee.
Are they already established?
Yes, because we have a contract out. And these gentlemen, because they're local, were not eligible to apply, and so that is underway. So that is, and the contract is on the website.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I had missed it, but I'm glad to know that.
Yeah.
Have they defined the parameters yet?
Yes, they've been defined as a beginning point, and we'll see how far it has to take us. We're only part way through, so we really can't say. We don't have the facts yet. And the purpose of the forensic audit is to get the facts and discover what really went on.
And when you talk about consequences, what we do is very, very serious. You're talking about people's lives, their reputations.
Exactly.
Those civil and criminal issues could raise their heads. So the people that are on this take it very, very seriously. They won't do innuendos. They'll only deal with the facts. It'll be like the old dragnet, only the facts, ma'am, kind of attitude. So the consequences here and the seriousness of it. So it's in it, it's just like any other forensic audit. You're delving for those original pieces of information, and that leads you to the next step.
Yeah. And Byron is correct. We have people's reputations, their lives and livelihoods, and we know circumstances where people have had to go to prison or make restitution if that's an option. So, or in the most extreme circumstance, someone died. So it's a very serious business. Let's talk a little bit about what you see as the bigger problem. Is it the original mistake or the cover-up?
Wow.
Oh, wow. Is it the chicken or the egg? Thanks, Karen. That's really great.
Yeah, well, we know people know how to cover up. We've had some examples lately.
You've seen the courts go in and really go after the cover-up.
Because of intent?
Because, right, of the intent. That
It's the
takes them to
intent.
the criminal piece. However, you have to have the opportunity, you have to have someone that has a need to hide it, and then the opportunity exists, and then they take it. And hopefully your organization has controls built around it so that even if somebody had the need, that the opportunity really doesn't exist because it'll catch itself. Now, collusion, when you have multiple people involved in a cover-up, it's very, very hard to catch. So in a forensic fashion, when you have collusion and you got multiple parties covering up, it really creates, it kind of expands the problem and how to unravel it.
I can talk about a little bit about whistleblowers. Have you gotten help from whistleblowers within the organizations you've been poking around? This is the last answer. We're ready for final comments from each of you after Steve.
The whistleblower, the key TAM actions, as they're called legally, are things that we have been involved with over the number of years that I've been doing this work. not frequently, but there's the occasion that it's the whistleblower that raises the flag that says you need to have some look-see at what's going on within the organization. And they themselves may be able to provide source documents, or they may be able to provide certain information, but invariably what's also been required is, again, going back to what Byron mentioned earlier, is the underlying supporting information needs to be obtained to prove up the case. It's not just you have a whistleblower that sits there and tells you everything. You need to be able to look at the underlying documentation and prove it.
Okay. Last word from each of you?
I talk with a number of people about putting together a column. I've written 300 columns over the last 2 years, about 80 of them bashing the school board in one way or another, because there have been some problems and some things to write about. A lot of people call me, a lot of people give me information. They really want, people are about as upset as I've seen them in the many years I've lived here, 20 years in Manatee County, about as upset as I've ever seen them. And they really want the school board to get to the bottom of this thing, to clean it up and get a fresh start. And I think that might be pretty ambitious, because some of the problems appear to go back years. There have been rates, old rates that have been used rather than new rates or corrected rates or adjusted rates. That's just one example, but there are many others that are built in. I've got a folder that's 3 inches thick of problems of one kind or another. They want to get to the bottom of this thing. They want a fresh start, and they want us to be able to attract a really strong school superintendent. We're going to have a hard time doing that if we're in the middle of a mess. And so that would be, in terms of a parting thought, this forensic audit, there are a lot of people expecting a great deal of this.
Correct. Thank you. Steve, did you want to add a little bit?
I don't know that there's anything, I mean, in the general sense, the forensic audit is a tool that is used by organizations to perhaps provide an investigation of an issue. While you've not asked us to talk about specifically Manatee County, I will say that you've hired an excellent law firm to oversee it. The accounting firm that has been selected is an excellent accounting firm, and I don't know the parameters that the audit committee gave them, but I'm sure if they were directed to do some of the things that Richard just mentioned, the result you'll get will be a very positive piece of information to move forward with.
Thank you. Rosalie?
You know, the property tax people pay for the school district is pretty high, and I think the public wants reassurance that their money is being spent wisely, and they want a thorough investigation of what went wrong and reassurances that it won't happen again. And I think that would help restore their confidence. Byron.
And I would say ditto to the first three, and that forensic audits unfortunately are necessary at times to understand why, and that therefore it shouldn't happen again if proper controls are then put in place. The tone at the top is very important. The accountability and the talent that you place in those seats on the bus, if you will, inside the organization are critical. And then there needs to be repercussions to when controls are broken. And there needs to be a consequence. If we have to go out and borrow money to do certain things, there's an interest cost, and it comes out of a certain place. And if that takes money out of the classroom, then who's responsible for that? Because the person that pays is our students and our teachers. And so for all this, you hope that from this we will have an improved environment that will lead to a really strong leader with a lot of accountability and transparency. And with technology where it is and the speed at which you should be able to get proper information so that the board can make accurate decisions, and the budget adjustments can be made timely. So all those things should be able to work together. And so from a forensic audit, you should get the tools necessary, but then you're going to have to take that information, you're going to have to follow up on it, and you're going to have to continue to test it until you have confidence that the system is running smoothly.
Well, I can assure you that those of us who are on the board will be watching this very closely and doing the follow-up that is necessary. I think we've had several failures and individual systems, and I think having this forensic audit and the discipline of the audit will help us a great deal. I thank you, each one of you, very much. Byron, Rosalie, Steve, and Richard, you've asked good questions, provided good answers, and the proof will be in how we all learn from this. The school system is a learning environment, and how we improve our systems and are more accountable and responsible to the taxpayers